My name is Garrett Sims. We have an exciting episode of Sports Timeout for you this week. I sat down with Coach Rob Waibel this week to talk to him about his coaching career and how he got into it and everything else. So thank you to Coach Waibel for his time, and we really hope you enjoy this episode of Sports Timeout. Before we start this episode, we want to give a special shout out to the Bank of Odessa for supporting Sports Timeout. Bank of Odessa has been locally owned and operated since 1880. They have 4 locations, 2 in Odessa, 1 in Oak Grove, and 1 in Lamont. You'll find them at bankofodessa.com, member FDIC. My name is Garrett Sims. We have a very special guest with me today. He's a role model in the Odessa community, Coach Rob Waibel. Thank you so much for joining me today, Coach Waibel.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to kind of get to know you a little bit more, and so to start off, I want to ask you, as an athlete, I know you went to Booneville High School,
Right.
And so I want to ask you a little bit, just to start off, what sports did you play and what did you enjoy?
Football and basketball and baseball were my primary sports. Very average athlete, but fortunate enough to be around very, very gifted athletes, as you played for one, Mark Thomas. Another one was Pete Rorvik, that was in town for a lot of years. Mr. Rorvik was an all-state basketball player. Coach Thomas was an all-state football player. I mean, I didn't get the chance to play with Mr. Rorvik because he was older, but I watched him throughout his career. So, just lucky, and played on some good teams with some good guys, good coaches, and I think that sets your path, as you know, kind of for your future. If you're around good, you said role models. Well, I always think life is you passing on what was given to you. And, it's a legacy. And my coaches showed me a lot about life, and I hope to give that to somebody else, what they gave to me.
Yes, sir. And I know you said Coach Thomas did coach me, so I did want to ask you, what was it like to play with him? And obviously, like you said, I think it is those older guys you look up to and
Right.
inspire to be that make you who you are. So I just want to ask you, what was it like to play with Coach Thomas?
When we won state, of course, in football, and Coach Thomas eats it, sleeps it, basically all-state player, in the Hall of Fame as a coach, in the Hall of Fame as a player, because our team got put in to the Missouri Hall of Fame. Playing with, and it's our family ties go back even beyond football. His brother was my roommate all through college, and we have been friends. His brother, especially, and myself, because his brother's a year younger than me, or a grade younger than me. Coach Thomas is a grade, Mark is a grade above me. So I was sandwiched right in between. But their father was also, we all raced go-karts. I know that sounds crazy, but that is another connection we had. And then baseball, another connection. Being around him, and then being fortunate enough to have worked and coached with him, man, just can't say enough about him as an individual and what he's done for me. I mean, like I go back and I said my coaches, I guess I'd have to put Coach Thomas in there as another person who brought me along, taught me a lot, and just love the guy. I mean, we sincerely, that's an interesting thing, as you know, being a player, when you're on a team, it's a bond that nobody else can take away. It's a bond that lasts for a lifetime. You might not remember you remember the scores of some games, you may not remember all the scores of all games, but the one thing you will never forget are the guys you played with. That will always be. And again, who would have thought when we grew up in Booneville that we would have been in Odessa working together? And, I just got lucky. That's all I can say.
I will ask you a little bit about that later. And I just kind of want to ask you, you said you played 3 sports. Was there one that you particularly liked better than the others? And how did that passion for that sport develop?
I'd say football. I'd say that if you ask me, I mean, I loved them all. I think when you're a young kid, you love them. You love the one you're in at that time.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in baseball, you love it. If you're in football, you love it. If you're in basketball, you love it. But football kind of goes back to our coaches. I mean, they had a passion. That passion if you're in the classroom and you have a passion for what you're teaching, well, then that passion goes to your students, and then your students catch fire and get that passion. And I think that's what happened with football, is that and we would go out, and I know it sounds crazy, Garrett, but we would go out and play at the park football all the time. And then if it snowed, we would meet on Green 9 at the golf course because it had a light, and we would play at night in the snow in coveralls. So to say, how did you end up loving it? My buddies and I, that's what we did. Isn't that funny? And I think it does equate to when you become good at a sport, because that's all you do. But you're having fun. I always said that with sports, when it quits being fun, I'm done, because I think that is where that passion comes from. If you love it, you're having fun, then it just shows when you're playing, and it shows that. So I'd say that's a tough question. I mean, probably football, but I think that I also like all the other sports. And again, it goes back to the season. Whatever season you're in, that's the sport I loved.
And I agree with you, and I'm not a wrestler, and I'm developing a passion for wrestling. It is just what you say, you fall in love with these sports for the things that they are, and like wrestling, I just fall in love with that in the movements and watching them and how they go about it. You talked about some of your coaches, and I just wanted to ask you, were some of them mentors to you, and do you have a favorite piece of advice that they give you and you still use to this day?
I had Coach Brumley, Coach Reagan. We had it's amazing when you look at a staff this year and how many coaches are on a staff. When we played, we had 40-some players and 2 coaches. And, those 2 coaches treated us all as individuals. That's the one thing that people, whether you teach or whether you coach, you got to know each kid as an individual, because they're not all the same, just like being a parent. Not every kid is the same, and that is one thing they probably instilled in me, is they treated us all like individuals and got us to know each one of us and what we liked and, what we did outside of the sport, not just what we did in the sport. So I'd say that carried over to me. I want to try to get involved, but to truly know your kids, you got to know what their interests are beyond the field, beyond the court. You got to know what their interests are. And I think and I'm going to insert this because this shows how much love Coach Brumley was I don't know, he might have been an All-American at CMSU. I don't know. He was a phenomenal athlete. We found that out at practice one day because we didn't realize he was a kicker, and he's a quarterback, but we didn't realize he was a kicker in college too, so we didn't scoot back far enough because he kicked it into the end zone every time. But what he said, and I share this a lot, I told you I was an average athlete. I was in practice every day. I gave the best you can give every day. Wasn't on the first string when we won state, but I sure played as much as the first string because we had a very talented group. But the interesting thing, they asked him after the season was over and we won state, they asked him, who was the best team you faced all year? Who was the best team that you played against all year? And he said, and this is the greatest thing anybody could say, he said they were in practice every day. He said our second group was our best team we ever faced, and that's why we were good. And I thought, wow, he remembered all of us. He didn't want to say, oh, it's because of this player, it's because of this player. Just to say that meant, wow, you are important.
Because that's special. You don't always get that, I think, in high school sports, and as I'm growing up, you don't always get those special relationships and those special people, and, it's really, really cool to have somebody like that coach you in it.
Yeah, he didn't even hesitate. We were actually went back to our 5th year state reunion, and he was being questioned at that moment by the press and stuff, and he didn't even hesitate. I mean, it was not one where he even gave it a thought. It was like, wow, he really believes this. He really truly thinks this. That is the fact. I thought, man, I walked on air that moment.
I wanted to kind of finish up the high school experience with, what maybe is a favorite memory or story you have from high school as a whole that really, looking back, stands out to you now?
Well, I think my teammates. I think the relationship, the camaraderie. I think that we used to have so much. Uh, we were, Coach Thomas would be able to say this. My class was kind of the fun class, the clown class. His was more, not that he didn't have some, he did. He had a couple that would go with us on a lot of things, but we did a lot of. But I look back and, you have these team building sessions where coaches take their teams and do team building. I think we were team building all the time together because we were messing around and doing stuff with each other all the time. But probably my greatest, I don't know, not greatest, but a fond memory is the first place I ever scored was in Odessa. And it was hilarious because wasn't blessed with speed, told you earlier, very average. I blocked. I was mainly a blocker. I played receiver, but I was mainly a blocker. I mean, I short routes, nothing long. We had a kid that could fly. He did all the long routes. But we had a play called 28 end around, and it was for Cooper, this other kid I told you that was so fast, and it was a reverse. Well, our coaches called it on a 2-point conversion for me in Odessa. And even the quarterback backed out and said, "Are you sure you want Robbie to do this?" And I thought I must have took forever to get to the other end on that reverse. And I remember one of my best friends was a quarterback, and he looked at me and I said, he was supposed to throw a block to get me in, and he didn't throw it. And I said, "Hey, man," he goes, "if you can't get over here sooner than that, I can't hold him forever." I said, "Thank you very much."
That's amazing. I'm glad you scored.
Yeah, no, but in Odessa, of all places, how did that happen? It was like a God thing, that I'm going to come back here. And, that I just always remember that because the coach kept waving at him, going, "Get in the huddle. Yes, run it, run it."
I wanted to ask you, after high school, what was next for you? And did you know what you wanted to do? And was coaching in the mind at first?
That's a very good question. First of all, I came from a construction family, so therefore there are 15 cousins, 11 boys. Everybody works construction except for me. And everybody just assumed when you were a Waibel that you were going to go into construction. But they're younger than me, the majority of them. So therefore, they didn't like school. I helped them with their homework. So it's kind of like interesting that when you help or do that, that's where my passion for teaching came. Because they did not like books. They did not like to study. And then I went to college. I went 1 year. My best friend got killed when we were out in the summer. And I dropped out for 2.5 because I was just lost without him. So when I went back, I think I was more driven to, do well. And because, I was encouraged by people to go back. I go back to Coach Thomas's brother, Scott. Dennis Edwards, another kid who was a year younger than me, kept saying, "Man, you need to go back. You need to get back into this." But I have a master's in history. I never chose to teach, I never chose to coach. I was going to be a teacher, then I was going to go to a junior college. When I got to Odessa at the junior high, I was going to stay 2 years and move to the city. I've told this story, and yet God always has a plan. So while I was in my classroom, the principal came down and said, "I talked to your principal in Booneville." And he said, "Why do you not have Robbie coaching? He played all the sports." And so he said, "Would you want to do 8th grade football?" And I said, "Okay." And I signed for $12,000. So he told me it was going to make another $1,000. I said, "Oh my gosh, that's quite a bit of extra." Well, then Mr. Rorvik came to town, and he was at the high school. I got a call from the high school and thought I was in trouble because I got called to the high school, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm teaching at the junior high, I'm getting called to the high school. So I went over there, and Mr. Rorvik was on the phone, and I asked, "Would you coach basketball with me?" So then I ended up coaching basketball. So to end up having everybody calling me coach, isn't it fascinating that God has that plan that I was just going to teach? I was going to stay here 2 years. I was going to go teach hopefully at a junior college, which I had my opportunity once at Longview when it was expanding, and then I decided to stay in Odessa. And, so you never know what's around that corner, do you?
No, you don't. And I'd just say you said Odessa, and I know you got to the middle school, but was there anything coincidental that happened in getting you here? Was there a reason or anything like that?
That interesting too. I had when I was in college, you went to the student union, and they brought in schools from all over, and we called it a cattle drive. You went in there, and you went to all these different interviews and gave them your resume, and I met Mr. Stevens was a superintendent. And I met him, and of all the people in that room, that was probably the one I connected with the most. And it was so interesting because he went back evidently and talked to Mr. Wilson, which was the principal, and I was in a fraternity. And I had interviewed some other places, and I hadn't heard back from Odessa, and I thought, well, that's strange. So one day I was sitting in the fraternity house, and one of my younger fraternity brothers came by and said, hey, some guy named Mr. Wilson called you a couple days ago. And I said, are you kidding me? His kid's name was Boatwright. I can tell you what I thought about doing the Boatwright. And he goes, sorry, man. I called Mr. Wilson, and he says, well, I thought maybe you weren't interested. I said, no, I'm very interested. And I think a lot has to do with this. Think about where I grew up, Booneville. Think of the size of Odessa and the size of Booneville. And we were conference schools against each other. So if you had to say why Odessa, I'd have to tell you that a lot of it had to do with it's similar to a Booneville.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be like going back home in a way. Though I didn't want to go back home, I wanted to branch out, go somewhere else, and my friends were all in the city. And so I chose Odessa also because it was close to the city, and I could go up there, and we played a lot of soccer. We played a lot of basketball. I could go up there and do that. And then fell in love with the community, and here I am.
Yes, sir, Coach Waibel. And I know you mentioned something there about Coach Rohrvig.
Yeah.
What was it like as you were getting into, that coaching and learning from him? What are some things you learned from him that, meant a lot to you?
How about everything in basketball? It's like Coach Thomas, everything in football. I couldn't have asked for two better guys to teach me the game. You can play the game. You can't be a good coach unless you're a good teacher. And both of them are good teachers. Both of them are good teachers. So therefore, I think a lot of it has to do with their mentorship of me. I wouldn't know and be able to do what I can do now without Coach Thomas and Coach Rohrvig.
And I kind of wanted to ask you a fun question. What does leadership mean to you? And what are some of the qualities you're looking for in some of these, young athletes today?
I always say, and I've said this before, there's 3 types of leadership. And a lot of people are like, what? And I said, 3 types. I said, and you have to use all 3 types at different times. Some maybe times you might even have to use them at one time. But the 3 types are that you work together with somebody as a team. You work on a task together. It'd be like playing football as a team. A coach is a part of it. A player is a part of it. The manager's a part of it. Statisticians are a part of it. The filmers are part. Everybody's a part of that, and everybody plays their part and their role. That's one part of leadership. The other part is where you delegate. You tell somebody, hey, I want you to do this. Now, they may not do it the exact way you want it done, but if you delegated it, you got to let them go. And that's how you teach young guys, young girls, young people. You teach them by letting them have that opportunity, and you stand back. And I'm not saying if they ask you a question, fine, but sometimes you got to let them learn on their own. And then the last type of leadership, I call authoritarian. That's where the buck stops with you. That's where somebody's got to make a decision. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of times you get in a situation, and a lot of people are like, nobody wants to make the decision. A true leader sometimes steps up, and you'll see that with teams when you're coaching them. You'll see a kid step up and make the decision, and the rest will follow. And you're like, wow. That's when you got a true leader. When everybody respects him, everybody looks up to him, everybody looks at him to make that decision. And when they make it, and a lot of people always think it's the quarterback. I've had centers. I've had, tackles. I've had, it doesn't have to be the quarterback. Everybody thinks the quarterback's leader on the team. Yes and no. The quarterback might be the best athlete for that spot, but does he contain that leadership? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times he does, but sometimes it's somebody else on that team that'll make that final decision. And that's that authoritative is kind of a bad word. It seems like you're dictating to somebody. That's not what I'm saying. It's somebody has to make the decision.
And the kind of ask you a little bit more, what did you want your kids to learn from you? Anybody that you coached, what was the main thing that you wanted them to learn?
The sport. So I always said there's a lot of kids, and there's probably a lot of kids like me. I mean, average athlete, but you want them to learn the sport. I always wanted my managers to learn the sport. I always wanted my statisticians to learn the sport. I have been around kids who could not play the sport but love the sport. I mean, therefore, I want to teach them. I wanted kids who could walk in at a halftime or could walk in and say, this is what they're doing, coach. This is what I think we can do to beat it. Then you've taught them the game. When they can look at you and say, but I go back to one other thing. I want them to have fun. I want them to not miss it. We put so much on winning, winning, winning. I always tell them the scoreboard does not always tell the outcome of the game. I've been in games that I've won that I thought I lost. I've been in games that I lost that I felt like I won because we played our best. We gave it our best. We did our best. So it's a shame that everybody always looks at the scoreboard. Even little kids will say, if there's not a scoreboard, did we win? Did we win? And I always say, did you have fun? And if they say, yeah, I said, well, then you won.
That's an awesome way of looking at it. I mean, I think the passion that you described for yourself, I think that's what everybody should have for these sports. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about technique and stuff. When did you start doing the basketball summer camps? And what does it mean to you to get to teach the kids about techniques at these early ages?
If you don't have a good foundation, you can't build the house. And I think that's the way fundamentals are. They asked me it's been 30 years ago, they asked me to come to a park meeting. And at that time, they were just playing games. And they said, what do you think we're missing? And I said, I think these coaches work hard. I think but I think sometimes some of them are given the fundamentals, but some of them are knowing that they're only going to play games, so therefore they're going for the win or what have you. I think that's when I told them we got to have fundamentals. We got to build that foundation. We got to make sure they understand how to do things correctly, because and I know, if you're taught how to do it correctly the first time, you don't develop those bad habits. If somebody develops bad habits, then you got to remove that bad habit and reteach how it's really supposed to be done. So you asked about the camp. I'll give you the little dog camp that I've been doing for 30 years. That's how it happened, because they called me on the phone and said, would you do a session? And I was at the high school at the time. And I said, I don't know if I have time. And they said, well, just do one session. So I said, okay. So I got a bunch of guys and girls off the teams together and said, look, I got to go over and work with these kindergartners and first graders. I said, if I'm going, you're going with me. So I took them with me. We did, which I've done stations forever, whether it be high school kids. I used to work CMSU camps. No matter where we went, we worked stations. And I said, here's what we're doing. Well, once we packed up and got ready to go out the door, the parents were going, why aren't the kids staying to help my kid? They didn't care about me. Mm-hmm. They wanted those kids to work with their kids. So the next coaches coming in said, great, you made us look good. So they said, would you ask those kids? And I asked the kids, would you stay? And you've already got a lot of time commitments playing sports, but they'd like you to help with the next group of kids. And this says a lot about our community. Those kids looked at me and go, sure, coach, we'll help them. And so I thought, that is how it got started. So the next year they called me and said, we just want you to do the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Because the parents want, and it wasn't me. I go back to that. Mm-hmm. It is not me. You can't do those things alone. It's those kids. And you talked about how do you develop the next leaders. Look what's happening there. If you work with these kids and they're coaching the next kids, sooner, even when I'm at those things, I bow out. I let them do the work. Now you're creating the next group of leaders. Now you're creating the next coaches. You just bow out and let them do it.
And then I know, because those young kids look up to them, and that's what they aspire to be one day. And I know that because I was once that kid looking up to the Ty Wagners and Cameron Ellises of the world. So, a fun question I wanted to ask you was, what's a piece of advice that you tell, a player starting out? I know there's a lot of things you probably say, but what's one piece of advice you give them?
Be your best. Don't try to be somebody else's best. And I know that didn't come from me. That John Wooden always said that too. Is I may not be the fastest. I may not be able to jump the highest, but as long as I run my fastest, as long as I jump my highest, then I know I've done my best, because you can't be somebody else. I can't be Michael Jordan. I can't be LeBron James. I can't be, Patrick Mahomes. I can't be them. But if I play my role and I give it my best, that's all you can do.
Yes, sir. And I think something you do, you are kind of like Mitch Holstis, and this kind of brings me to my next question. You started announcing football games, I don't know when, but for a large majority of my life, I just wanted to ask you, how did announcing on Friday night start? And obviously I know you love it, but just take me through your passion for it.
I think that's, I go back to what we talked about earlier. How can you stay a part of the game? How can you play your role? What can you do? And I think that's when I retired from here, because I couldn't do it because I had to monitor the crowd on Friday night as a middle school administrator. So I asked the AD, I said, when I'm done, can I go up in the box? And he said, absolutely. And I go back to, you ask why. How do I stay connected with kids like you? How do I stay connected with the community? How do I play my part in that game? That's what I can do, to play my part, to get connected with you, and stay around something I'm very passionate about.
And I want to ask you, out of all the games you probably ever, watched or witnessed, is there one that stands out to you that you really enjoyed?
Boy, that's a tough question.
I know it's a very tough question.
Isn't it interesting? I guess I would have to say moments. To say one game, probably winning state. But I mean, and watching you guys, and other teams win state, because that's something that only one team that year can, I know there's 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, 5. I'm talking about in each class, there's only one team that's going to come out on top. So when you watch a group of kids come together and do that, that's going to something that's going to stick with them for a lifetime. That's something they will never forget, because that's the moment, that you were like, oh my gosh, we did it. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. I never thought we would do this, And so, and then to go beyond that, I think just watching kids, when they get that passion that they just did their best and they played their hardest, and it's emotional. I mean, that. It becomes extremely emotional, because that means that's when you love it. That's when you love it, when you get that emotion.
Yes, sir, Coach Waibel. And we've talked a lot about the community, and obviously your support in the community, but I wanted to say, what does it mean to you to give back to this community and support the Bulldogs the way that you do?
I think the one thing is about this community is they've given me so much. So my feeling is, when somebody's given you a lot, what can you do for them? Yeah. Because I think that this town took me in. This town, there's so many mentors running around this town, that own businesses, that, just neighbors, just people who I've met, through the time of being here. There's so many. So it's kind of like in all communities. And I said earlier, what part can you play? If they've given you that much, what can you give back to them?
Yes, sir. And I want to talk about a couple accomplishments you recently received. The Lifetime Achievement Award from the Odessa Chamber of Commerce, and you actually received the key to the city of Odessa. And obviously, I just wanted to ask, what do those great accomplishments mean to you?
I'm going to put it this way. When you accept something like that, you accept it for all the people who have helped you. There is no way, like you talked about a basketball camp, and I talked about the kids. When I accept that award, it's accepting it for all those kids that have helped me. When I God, they're great. They're such honors. I cannot even put into words how much they mean to me. However, I don't think that they're an individual. I've never said that. There's no way you could do all the things that you put together or you volunteer for without the other volunteers, without the other kids helping you. So, yeah, they're nice, but I think you know that when you play on a state team and you get a trophy. Is the trophy just for one person or is it for the whole group?
No, it's for the whole group, and it's...
Yep, absolutely it is.
So, that's all I had for you. Hopefully I had some good questions for you.
I enjoyed it.
I'll open it up if there's anything else you want to say.
No, thanks for bringing me in today. Thanks for visiting with me. I appreciate what you're doing. You're already taking a hold of this community like all of us. You're the next generation coming about. So, proud of you. All right.
Thank you, Coach Waibel. I appreciate the kind words. This has been our guest interview with Coach Rob Waibel. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Sports Time Out. Thank you so much to Coach Waibel for having the time to come in and talk with me. It means a lot to me. And like I said, I just hope you guys have really enjoyed it. Make sure you're picking up your copy of the Odessan to get all the other sports information we're not mentioning on the podcast, as well as government issues and local news. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.